Good morning, and happy Monday. And yes, I know it's been a minute since I've done a Monday motivation in this way. So I just want to first say thank you for those who are joining me on this Monday, and welcome to another About Time Journey Well Monday inspiration. And whether you are listening from home, your bed, your car, the gym, wherever it is that you may be at this very moment in time, thank you so much for joining me. And I hope that this Monday inspiration helps you and carries you and encourages you through this week. All right, so all week, this particular scripture has been in my mind where it says, where the question is asked, is there anything too hard for God? And this week has been filled with so much stress and heartache for loved ones, for myself. And it's just kind of been a weight on me, what they've been going through, what I've been going through. And, I felt over me like isolation of some sort of mental, spiritual, physical, emotional isolation that I kind of put myself into. And, when I realized that was happening, I was like, okay, Joy, you got to draw close to God right now. And so as I began to draw close to God, all I could hear was this question playing over and over and over in my head. And it was, is there anything too hard for God? And so I had to look it up after it had come in my mind at this point 5 or 6 times. I had to look it up because I knew the scripture, but I didn't know offhand in that moment where the scripture was found or the context of the scripture, like who said it. Like I couldn't think of any of those things. And so with that curiosity, I decided to look it up. Like Google was my friend. And so I found myself at Genesis 18 and 14, and that's where that particular scripture is. And so just to provide you with some context, Genesis 18:14 comes in the midst of God's promise to give Sarah and Abraham a son. And, they didn't believe that this was possible. Sarah, even at that point, kind of laughed like, okay, you gonna give me a son at this old age? And the Lord said in that verse, or asked, is there anything too hard for the Lord? And it was a rhetorical question because there's no record, at least of what I can see, of Abraham and Sarah responding at that moment, or even God answering with a no, even though we know that there's nothing too hard for him. But he continued and said, is there anything too hard for the Lord? And then followed it up with, at the appointed time, I will. And then he continues with what his promise was to them. And there are many versions, of this scripture, but this one kind of sticks out to me because it reminds me that I can fill in the blank after the I will with what God has promised me. And so I want to encourage you to remember that what God has promised you when you're faced with an impossible situation, remember the words of the Lord. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will. And then I want you to fill in the blank right there with what you know God has promised you. His word will not return to him void. And even if you're in a place with your relationship with God where you're like, man, God, I'm not even sure of what you promised me, then what you need to do at that moment is get in your word and lean and learn the promises of God over your life. And it don't even have to be complicated. Like I said, Google is my friend. You can get on Google and Google, what are the promises of God in the Bible? And it'll give you multiple scriptures of things that God has promised in the Bible. And then after you get that into your spirit, into your mind, and now you then adjust your faith accordingly with a new certainty that God will, and you can fill in the blank of a promise that God has made for your life. There is absolutely nothing too hard for him. And it's like, when you realize that, now you're asking yourself, because I know there's nothing too hard for you, God, how do you need me to show up in this situation? And in some cases, he might tell you to be still. In other cases, he might tell you need to seek me a little more. In another case, he might say, okay, these are the next steps that I need for you to take. But you just have to be willing. You have to have your faith and you have to be obedient. Your faith and your obedience to God makes the impossible possible. So I'm not saying that we're not going to have our moments and we're not going to feel down. But what I want to remind you is there is nothing too hard for God, even where you are. And at the appointed time, God will fulfill his promises according to his will for your life. So is there anything too hard for God? No. God will. And I need you to fill in the blank with what you know he's promised you. And so that is the Monday inspiration for you this week, to remember God will. And there is nothing too hard for him. I hope that you have an amazing and blessed week, blessed day. And I thank you so much for taking time to tune in and join me this morning. I'm not going to say I'm going to be back next Monday, but what I will say is I will definitely be back. I love you and you all have a great day. Journey with